Thank you. It's great to be with you. I look forward to your questions afterwards. And I'm going to be speaking today on navigating political frontiers. I've orchestrated this presentation just for you, reinforced exclusively with my own photos on my travels around the world, to shed light in this case on how your business opportunities, just like this tree, are shaped by forces outside of it. And those forces shape opportunities and risk that's available to your business. If you learn how to deal with those outside interests, your life will be like a walk in a Paris park. But if you don't, you will find that your opportunities are cut short. Business has for a long time focused on the company. That is, the stakeholders, the shareholders, your stakeholders being your employees, your customers, your suppliers, and the communities in which you operate. But I'm here to tell you that you really need to focus on the shapeholders, and they have a significant ability to shape the opportunities and a risk available to you. I call these shapeholders primarily the political, the regulatory, the media, and the activist groups. And you'll find that the difference between them and as true stakeholders, they may or may not have any stake in your company. If you think about Greenpeace and an energy company, a fossil fuels energy company, the only stake that Greenpeace wants in that company is a stake through their heart. So to be treating them in a similar way as you would true stakeholders would not be optimum. But that Greenpeace and other environmentalist companies can certainly shape the opportunities available to those energy companies. So you do need to engage them, but engage them in a completely different way because they're going to be coming after you in a completely different way. That's what we're going to be talking about here today. Many people that view business as a force for ill in the world will try to convince you that they are the heavyweights in Washington and capitals around the world. But having both been in the C-suite of a Fortune 100 company as treasurer of Macy's, as well as in Congress, and not just engaging in America, but engaging globally around the world, both in business, helping to buy and expand Haagen-Dazs around the world, and in politics, I was surprised to find that rather than the voice of business being like the roar of a tiger, that it was more akin to the meow of a kitten. And it isn't because business isn't big and strong and powerful, it is. But too often when they're engaging with the public, that they are tentative, reactive, and combative. And as a result, they end up paying taxes coming and going. In America, the highest corporate taxes on the planet. And they have layers upon layers of regulation heaped on them that makes it harder for them to really engage in business. It used to be that we relied on that invisible hand of Adam Smith to guide the economy, the individual interests and aspirations of individuals. But today, this is my best picture of business in a political age. It's almost as if your business gets even close to going 30 kilometers an hour, that hand of government's going to reach down from the sky and help you slow down. And so we have governments trying to muzzle the lion's roar of capitalism. We have activist groups trying to paint businesses for an increasingly list of woes. And we have government companies trying to leverage their government against you in competition around the world. Too often, businesses have a very narrow market-only focus, and they're not focused enough on the non-market, on these shapeholders, and as a result, they too often stumble. You take Coca-Cola. It's an icon at the London Business School, but it's banned in Boston. Banned in Boston City schools and Boston City properties. Why? Because one form of shapeholders, activists, agitating with another form of shapeholders, school board members and city councils to get it banned on obesity grounds. And if you go to Indonesia, they've had a punitive tax imposed on them that's imposed only on carbonated sweet beverages and not non-carbonated sweet beverages that are made by the local Indonesian beverage producers. So You go on to technology. Google couldn't find a way to operate in China and ceded a whole region to Baidu that has resulted in Baidu gaining tens of billions of dollars of market value that otherwise perhaps could have been Google. You have Syngenta that makes agriculture products that's finding it harder to sell its agriculture products because environmentalists and others have painted that as frankenfood when it comes to GMOs. And you have pharmaceutical companies that have their prices and other things significantly determined by governments around the world, making it imperative for their business to know how to engage them. And mining companies face any number of issues. Most recently in Indonesia, they banned exports of raw ore, forcing them to build smelters. So all around the world, you're seeing risk imposed on all kinds of industries. But dealing with shapeholders is more than just managing risk. It's about the opportunities that it can create for you. Just one quick example, phone service. Back when I was young, in America, you not only got your phone service from AT&T like everyone else, but they were the ones who made your phone. And they were the ones who made the phone operating system, and they were the ones who sold you the phone. And it was only because shapeholders, activists, agitated first with the courts and then with the government that created a new telecommunications law that we have this whole new world where today in America you can get your telephone service from AT&T or not. You can get your phone from Apple or not. You can get your phone operating system from Google or not. And you can buy your phone anywhere, including my personal favorite, right near the bubblegum machine at my old employer at Macy's. And if you think about the fact that there probably wouldn't be an Android versus Apple fight today, there may not be an Android or Apple, had shapeholders not reshaped this marketplace. This transformation that has happened in a relatively short period of time, made available to you by shapeholders changing, has created not just great opportunities for expanded telecommunication services for customers, but significant opportunities in many industries for business. So shapeholders can both expand or shrink your risk, and they can expand or shrink your opportunities. These are big deals. They make a big difference. And if you ask me what's going to have a bigger impact on the future prosperity of a company or organization, it's more shapeholders than it is many of the functional things you'll be talking about. Because there's a lot of business people that are good at marketing and operations and logistics, but there's not a lot of people that are good at this. So this is a key differentiating skill. To help you figure out how to engage this important class of outside interest, I've created a 7A approach towards effective shapeholder engagement. The first 3 A's tell you how to be properly prepared: authenticity, anticipation, and assessment. The next set of 4 A's, advance, avert, assemble, and acquiesce, give you your 4 options for reacting to an engagement, either an opportunity or a risk proposed by shapeholders, and I'm going to go through each of those briefly. Let's start with authenticity. First, authenticity means that you're not engaging in crony capitalism, trying to get some kind of sweetheart deal for you that's beneficial to the person in the government you're working with and you, but not beneficial to society. That will end up backfiring. Second is, whatever you as an organization commit to do for society, you better be able to deliver. If you say you're going to recycle, you need to have the capacity to recycle, unlike what we're seeing in this photo. BP got into a lot of trouble because not everybody thought that what they were doing was beyond petroleum. The better approach is to align what you're committing to do for society with your core business capabilities. I'll give you just one example, Nike. Nike has aligned its purpose, what benefits its bottom line in society, to be promoting physical activity. We all know that in many parts of the world we have an obesity issue. Nothing can solve that more than having more physical activity. It's better for society to have more physical activity, and guess what? It's better for Nike as well. So there is great power in having you align a purpose for your business that's beneficial to society. Secondly, you need to anticipate. You will find that you need to expect the unexpected. Barbie woke up one morning, Mattel, I should say, woke up one morning and had somebody unfurling a banner over their headquarters with a photo of Ken saying, "Barbie, it's over. I don't date girls that kill rainforest." And what was that all about? It wasn't anything Mattel did. It wasn't anything a Mattel supplier did. It was a supplier of a supplier in terms of packaging for a Barbie doll that got them into trouble. So you need to anticipate it all that way down to the supplier of a supplier, because nobody's ever heard of the supplier of a supplier, but they have heard of Barbie and Mattel. So they're going to come after you, particularly if you have a brand name. In those types of instances, when that banner unfurls, a New York minute is 59 seconds too slow. You can't say, "This just happened, let's have an executive committee meeting and try to figure out how to respond to this." You're better off trying to prevent that from happening in the first place, but certainly having a strategy for how you're going to react to it right away. You need to figure out which guns are pointing in your direction and look right up the barrel to figure out what's coming your way. So who's going after other organizations in your industries? What are they talking about on their websites? What are they saying is important? And you need to figure out how that relates to you. Third, you need to assess. You will find that when it comes to assessing, some of these issues will be a moral issue, and you can't judge it just from your moral benchmark or from others. Some of those would be from a policy. And when you judge these, you're coming up with two different things that you need to assess. Is the request that's being asked of you or the opportunity that's available to you legitimate or not? Sometimes you're asked to do things that is just a crazy idea, and they really have no right to ask you that. And if you decide to either go after it or try to combat that request, are you going to prevail or not? Is there an upside or not? Coming out of this analysis, there's a 2x2 available to you. Depending on legitimate or illegitimate, upside possible or not, there are 4 different options. We're going to go through each of those briefly. If it is a legitimate request and there's upside possible, that's an example of advancing mutual interest. Just one example, I'll give a lot more at the end of the presentation, Toyota. Toyota went to California, who wanted to promote more responsible, more sustainable transportation, and got the ability to have Prius cars and other hybrids in high occupancy vehicle lanes with just one driver. Even that one driver in a hybrid is more responsible transportation than one driver in a non-hybrid. So California advanced their interests of a more responsible, more sustainable transportation system. But clearly, there was probably a lot more Priuses sold to people that wanted to get to work without having to have an extra passenger with them. Secondly is avert. If you look at avert, it's a situation where it's a legitimate concern, but you maybe don't want to do with it, but you're not going to win. I can't tell you how many businesses would come into my office as a congressman and say to me, "You know, we don't want this to happen." And I say, "It's a legitimate concern they have. What's your answer?" You can't fight something with nothing, but too many businesses think they can fight something with nothing. An example of this is soda. They are getting attacked, as we just described, because of obesity. If you create a path of something that they can do, if they feel compelled to regulate it, there's a path for it. Soda companies voluntarily, Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, Snapple, Pepsi, and Procter & Gamble all got together and said, we're going to voluntarily put a calorie count for every individual serving on all of our packaging. And we're going to make sure there's a mix whenever we have a vending machine, particularly in a place like schools, and help educate consumers for them to make personal choices. This is a path that would avert perhaps something more onerous being placed on them. The third is acquiesce. This is something that's illegitimate, but you either aren't going to win or can't afford to spend the fight to win. An example of this is anybody who's read the book Heidi knows that the Swiss think their milk is better than everybody else's milk. Now, you could spend a lot of time trying to convince the Swiss that their milk is no better than anybody else's milk, but it's probably not worth it, which is why you all knew, of course, that McDonald's was Swiss, in that they're buying all their milk for any of their ice cream in Switzerland, from Switzerland. It's just easier to acquiesce. Then we come to the final category of assemble. Sometimes you have an illegitimate request imposed on you or asked of you that is either such a big change to your business that you have to win, or you think you can win. These are the most difficult challenges you will face. In these, there's a couple of paths you need to take. First, you need to make sure you get the terrain right. Sun Tzu in The Art of War said you want to be on the sunny side of the hill. What is the sunny side of the hill in this type of battle? And it begins with getting the answer right for what and where. What question you want to ask and what arena do you want to fight it in. And as you think that through, you need to think through, for the issue you're dealing with, who has the power to make the decision? And it's different in every country you go around the world. For example, the monarch of Doha perhaps does have the power to make the decision in Doha, whereas the monarch in Spain is largely powerless. The party in China is a very powerful force and perhaps does have the power to make the decision. The parties in America, by comparison, are much weaker. The Congress in America is very powerful. The committees of the Congress are very powerful. But conversely, the parties, the Congress or the Parliament in Europe is by comparison much more likely to be the person that has the power to make that decision. Our commissions are very powerful, but you know what? They're even more powerful in Japan. So the answer is more likely to be the ministry in Japan than it is just about any other country around the planet. You need to know this. Sometimes they might go to the court. Sometimes the answer is to go up above and go to an international organization. Next thing you need to know is what criteria will they use for making a decision. In America, we revere our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The country that's probably closest to America is the UK. They don't have a Constitution or a Bill of Rights. So therefore, they're not using those there for their criteria for making a decision. You know, how does it make sure that the party stays in power and that China stays stable is the number one criteria if you're in China. Those same criteria may not be in many other countries. Too often you're having to battle against graft or corruption being part of the decision-making process. And oftentimes in a democracy, one of the key criteria is how do I get reelected? And how will this impact my chances to be reelected? Thirdly, you need to figure out what channels of communication do I have available to me. In many places around the world, like in America, you can say whatever you want and get away with it. Some places, the channels of communication are much more defined and much more limited. Do you have the ability to go on the news and say what you want? Do you have the ability to have advertisements pushing your point of view? Do you have the ability to be out on the streets and generating grassroots support? Those are questions that you all need to ask in order to come up with what is the terrain I want to be engaging on. Let me give you one example that relates specifically to Japan, and that is the battle over whether or not for intellectual property like video games or movies or music, you should be allowed, the government should restrict internet from allowing somebody to steal that. So the old media companies, including Sony and Viacom and others, said that their question was, should U.S. companies assist foreign companies in stealing U.S. properties? So if we in the U.S. created this video game or this movie or this song, should U.S. companies assist foreign companies in stealing that? And they chose as their arena Congress. Facebook, Google, Twitter, New Media had a different question in a different arena. They said, do you want the federal government to black out your internet? And to prove the point, they literally shut down Facebook and other internet outlets for a period of time. And they chose their arena, public opinion. Who won? Who won? New Media won. And what you'll find is this is the important part of picking the right question, because the answer to each question is obvious. If you have people coming to you and trying to give you their answer, you know they're amateurs, because it's who wins the battle of the question that wins. Next, you need to find friends. It's not good to be a lone ranger in this business. It's a game of addition, not subtraction. And those that are most different from you are most valuable to you. You need to build a whole orchestra of people that can really connect with all different types of people, all different types of congressmen. If you're in an international setting, a lot of times that might begin with your embassy or your chamber. You might want to bring the associations into this, and you might for sure want to include NGOs, because they can reach out to a completely different audiences than business can. And most importantly, you need to connect with people's constituents. You as an employer probably have constituents and stakeholders and suppliers or employees that are constituents of the decision maker. Make sure you're working with them as well. Finally, you need to make your case. And this is a challenge where you run into in Asia. If you just think about the battle that I just told you between old media and new media, Asia, and in particular Japan, is much more likely to start at the top of the hierarchy as opposed to the bottom. Asia, in particular Japan, is much more likely to have indirect communication as opposed to direct communication. And if you think of that battle between old media and new media, the people who lost started at the top, Congress. The people who won started at the bottom, internet users. The people who lost had an indirect, nice, genteel conversation between a company and a congressman. Those are the ones who lost. The ones who won were the ones that were very direct. How much more direct can you be than just blanking out a screen for Facebook to prove a point to people? So this is part of the challenge, that it's hard to culturally understand how important it is to get the people on the bottom and have a direct conversation with them. Too often, as I say, here you want to start from the top and you think that gets it done. Where in reality, it's getting constituents in your office that are voting for you that you want to connect with. It's what a public official is going to be more worried about. Yes, you need to have that inside approach. You need to be able to hopefully connect with the decision maker. And that will only be effective if you are viewed as a good, balanced information source that is not just giving the view from your own company, but how does that relate to a better America, a better Japan? You may be called upon to testify, and that can be vitally important in terms of whether you're going to win your case. You will also find that building that broad group of associations locally is important, and you're going to need to make your case in capitals. But you're also going to need to have an outside game. Too often people only play inside or outside and not both. Outside is beyond the capital, beyond the decision makers. How are you affecting their constituents? And that's where doing things like engaging with society in a helpful way, here's Caterpillar helping with education, can be very powerful in terms of your credibility. It means you may actually have to rally in the district. It means you may need to get farmers, individual farmers, putting out signs on their farms, pushing your point, which is what we call grassroots approach. And you might need to use every vehicle available to you. When Mayor Bloomberg tried to limit the size of beverages that you could buy, they had it right on the trucks that were shipping the beverages around New York. This is a very tricky balancing act that has to happen. It's hard to do this. It's easy to go wrong. That's why it's important for you to get it right. And oftentimes, it's more than just trying to avoid bad things. I want to emphasize again here at the close, there's great impact for business to positively impact society in a way that benefits both society and them. You see it all around, but too often we just don't see it. When a company that makes detergent can do it in a more concentrated fashion, that's good for the environment, but it's good for the manufacturer and the retailers because they're shipping less. When Barclays pays for half of the bike program in London only had to pay for half of it. Barclays gets associated with good environment and good healthy living. When Facebook cooperates with the security law enforcement, if somebody runs away with your kid, you're much more likely to find it if they can spread that over Facebook really quickly. If a electronics company can help you figure out how you have to deal with food, not just have to deal with food in a more efficient way so you waste less, you're solving hunger. When you can figure out how to make water, clean water more available, that's a good thing for society, as it is more affordable health. So you as a business have a powerful impact and can have an even more powerful impact on advancing good in the world in a way that's good for you and society. These are the types of things we teach in our new Master's Advocacy in the Global Environment at the Graduate School of Political Management at George Washington University. We'd love to talk to you about that more. We do face very serious headwinds of issues you face in your organizations, but I'm confident that you can avoid that crash up if we just learn to balance all these priorities in a way that leaves you and society in a better place. I look forward to your questions. Thank you. Obrigado.
Well, good evening. I'm very glad to stand here today to have some discussions with you. And as you know, the main subject is basically public engagement. Mark have kind of outlined the essence of public engagement. And in his word, it's more like managing the shapeholder. I think a shapeholder is a great word. And it does shape the business strategy. And what I'm going to do from my part is to give you more kind of a specific example, if I may say, my experience, which I had when I was in Honda and in the United States. A story will be a little bit old. It's in 1980s. But I'd like to kind of start giving you a more specific example of what does public engagement means. How do you deal with the shapeholders? So this will kind of inspire more discussions later on with all of you, okay? Okay, it's not moving. こうですよ。あ、こっちか、右か。右ですね。はい。Okay, I would like to start with this old photo here. And I have a question. Who knows this old gentleman here? Does anybody know who he is? Anybody? Yes, he is Soichiro Honda, who's the founder of Honda Motor. This photo was taken in 1989 in Detroit. Okay? And basically, his age was like 84 at that time. Okay? And this photo itself really kind of symbolizes my root, I would say in Japanese, genten, of public engagement. And I'm going to discuss why this illustrate the essence of my experience later on. But let me start my story 7 years before this photo was taken. By the way, this is myself. I think this was at the age of 34, okay, 34. But 7 years before, I was around like 27, something like that, okay? What happened 7 years before this photo was taken was I was assigned to Washington, D.C. for Honda to establish the public relations operation. Why did Honda need a public relations office in Washington, D.C. In 1983? I'd like to go and start telling my story, okay? And if you do have questions, you can ask if there's something which is not clear for you. Now, what was happening in 1980s was that not just Honda, but all Japanese automotive company was facing a very, very anti-Japanese sentiment in the 80s. Why? This is some figures which I show you. In 1978, the market share of Japanese-made US vehicles was 10.8%. But after 2 years, that market share went to 20.8%. Meanwhile, the big three, which is GM, Ford, Chrysler, they were registering a huge deficit here. So as you can see, their financial situation was quite bad. And the basic reason was the big three failed to shift their product, which is cars, of course, on the compact side. And at that time, most of the big three were developing big, huge cars. And because there were twice an oil crisis in the end of 70s, the whole market shifted to compact cars rather than large-size car. So what happened was, at that time, Japanese company was the suppliers of compact cars. So that was basically the reason for this huge market share gain in 2 years. So what happened is the US government and the Japanese government start to negotiate. And they kind of set a restriction of how much cars you can import from Japan to the United States, which is called Voluntary Restraint Agreement. It started in 1981. The volume was 1.68 million units that Japanese company can import from Japan. In 1984, it was increased to 1.85 million. And finally, in 1985, 2.3. And in 1994, it was abolished, okay? Now, of course, if the import is being restricted from Japan, automatically the sales of Japanese companies is going to go down, but it didn't. Actually, it increased total amount. Because although the import is down, most of the Japanese companies started to manufacture the car in the United States. So as a result, the market share even went more, up to 35%. Now you can imagine what kind of impact that will have into the US society. It's quite clear. This is a photo which symbolizes the anti-Japanese sentiment in those days. These are the unemployed automotive workers who were just laid off. And they are crushing the car. And this car, by the way, is Toyota Corolla, okay? And you can see this message, say UAW, which is a United Automotive Workers, it's a union, says, if you sell in America, build in America. So the message is quite clear. If the Japanese will start manufacturing in the United States, they will get the job. So that was a kind of message, and this kind of thing happened all over United States in those days. One of a very, very unfortunate incident happened in 1984 in Detroit. A Chinese-American person who was enjoying his drink in the bar was basically murdered by unemployed workers with a bat. This was a very, very sad story happened. But you can see the whole situation was so terrible at that time. Now, the problem was this anti-Japanese feeling was basically sentiment was affecting most of the Japanese automotive operations in the United States in many ways. So this was what I call the public in those days. And Honda had to face how to engage with this public. And when I was assigned to Washington, D.C., I got a mission, this is, well, the pictures are a little bit vague, but he is, in those days, in 1983, he was chairman of Honda Motor. He kind of gave me a mission, okay? What he said is, he used to tell me, he called me An-chan, in Japanese, An-chan, which means, hey, young guy. So he told me that, hey, young guy, eventually, US will draw the line somewhere along the Pacific Ocean between US and Japan. I don't care whether Toyota or Nissan will fall onto the Japan side, okay? But it is crucial for Honda to fall on the US side. Your mission is to make sure that Honda will fall on the US side. Now, this is the direct translation of what he told me in Japanese. This basically means get the public US support to Honda's operation in the United States. Get the public support Honda's operation in the United States. That is what he means. Make sure that Honda will fall onto the US side rather than the Japan side. So basically, this was the kind of comment that mission that I received from the chairman. So basically, that was my start of my experience. This was started in 1983, which I spent almost 7 years dealing with this issue. How can I get a support from a US public to support Honda's strategy in the United States? Because this was a very serious issue for Honda, more than Toyota and Nissan. Toyota and Nissan already had a strong foundation in Japan. They basically dominated the Japanese market. But for Honda, we were not. Honda was totally a small player in Japan. So the frontier was only in the United States. If Honda really wants to become global, US was the only market in those days that Honda has to be successful. So Honda really had a serious issue, how to face with this issue. And basically, if I may be specific, the issues that Honda had in those days was clearly 3 issues. One was maintaining the voluntary restraint agreement. This is a restriction the Japanese can import from Japan. And Honda wanted to maintain it, okay? Toyota and Nissan wanted to abolish it, okay? The big 3 wanted to reduce the volume more, smaller. But why Honda wanted to maintain was quite obvious, because Honda didn't have enough capacity in Japan to import anymore. So basically, if the restraint will maintain, we can make sure to contain Toyota and Nissan, not to bring any more cars from Japan. At the same time, Honda was kind of focusing on manufacturing in the United States more aggressively than Toyota and Nissan. So the first issue that Honda had to achieve was to really maintain the restrictions at the same level. Because if it goes down, Honda is also going to get affected, because there will be more smaller number of cars Honda can import from Japan. So maintaining it was the biggest issue. The second one was to really discard the registration of so-called the local content. Now, this bill, the content is really focused and centered to Japanese companies. The big 3 and the UAW realized after establishing a restraint import from Japan, they realized the Japanese companies are now moving more on the local production in the United States. So the big 3 and the UAW wanted to restrict that too. So what they came up was a bill called local content, which means Japanese companies who are building cars in the United States at least have to have 75% of US-made local content, local parts. If they don't meet that, they should be defined as an import, which will be covered by the restraint agreement. So this was their strategy. But this was kind of unfair, because in those days, even the big 3 only had 50% of local content. So they were kind of imposing 75%, which is totally much higher than their standard, only to Japanese companies. So what we were facing was really to make sure that this law will never happen. That was the second issue, okay? The last issue was the most serious issue we had, which means unionization of Honda Ohio plant, which was the main manufacturing facility for Honda in those days. Avoid the unionization. Why? Because the UAW really had a different way of managing the automobile companies. As you know, one of the strengths that Japanese company had, Toyota, Nissan, Honda, was what we call Japanese manufacturing method. It's called Kaizen, as I think most of you know this word Kaizen, just in time. All these systems was possible because a Japanese company had a very specific process that everybody will work together closely with no difference and help each other and try to create and embed the quality into the product at the assembly line. So there was so much focus on the assembly workers to make sure that the product is there, the quality is there. But the United Auto Workers in those days classified like the whole process into maybe a few hundred processes. And each processes have a different wage level. So what happens if this system is going to be introduced is totally the teamwork approach to build good quality car is going to be affected totally. In other ways, we cannot apply Japanese manufacturing system at all. And the Japanese manufacturing system was based on what I call high mix, low volume production system, not a mass production system. Because Japan didn't have enough, just one model can sell millions of cars. One model will sell very small volume, but there will be a lot of different segmented cars. So the Japanese manufacturer had to invent some way to how to produce cars in a market which they face, which is high mix, low volume market. And it turned out to be the Japanese manufacturing system became what it is called lean production, which is quite different from what the Big Three was doing in those days, which was called mass production. So for Japanese companies, especially for Honda, to implement the lean production, it was totally essential, crucial to avoid the unionization of the plant. So these were the three areas. And what was crucial was definitely we had to engage the public to support our argument. And what basically we did was 5 things. First of all, it was very important to really express the philosophy of Honda. In those days, basically what happened was every people identified the product, Civic, Accord, they know that. But they didn't see anything behind that, if I may say. They did not see behind Accord what kind of company, what kind of philosophy, what kind of strategy does the company which makes Accord have. They didn't have any context behind the product or a kind of a corporate image behind each product. So what was essential for Honda was to really build the corporate image behind each product, which was so crucial to get a support from the public. So what we did is, first of all, we started to advocate, communicate that our strategy in the United States is to really manufacture product in the market in which they are sold, localization strategy, which is our philosophy and which is a philosophy or principle which is driving our strategy in the United States. And also, second point is make sure that that philosophy is being, not just being taught or told, but visualize this philosophy is already implemented through a clear vision and also a clear strategy. Third point is to really communicate that to broader audiences, which, as Mark said, not just to the users, consumers, customers, but also to shareholders, of course, but also to every stakeholders, but also to the shapeholders, the public. And the fourth one is really to leverage the strengths of why Japan. Honda was born in Japan. And what is Japan? What kind of contribution is Japan going to provide to the United States? It's the lean production. Because Japanese company was basically, if they start manufacturing cars in the United States, what's going to happen automatically is this lean production technology is going to be transferred gradually to the US soil, which now what's happening is most of the Big Three already is now in the lean production side. So you can see that Honda is going to contribute to the United States by introducing more lean production to the US soil, including the US suppliers, but also the Big Threes too. And the fifth one is by having these 1 to 4, really make it clear what is Honda's identity in the United States. What is Honda's value to the United States? What is Honda's contribution to the United States? So those are the things that we did. And let me just give you 2 more examples of what we did. The first thing we did is, as I said, it's very important to visualize the philosophy, the visions that Honda has. So what we came up was, we named it, our message was that we want to send to the public that Honda's vision is to really develop a self-reliant operation in the United States. It's not a Japanese company, it's not an American company, but it's more like an international company which has a self-reliant operation, which really has a contribution to the US auto industry. And what we did is we developed a strategy called 5-part strategy, which means basically we are kind of committing, Honda is going to make a commitment in research, development, engineering, manufacturing, and sales and exports in United States. And first was to strengthen Honda's US export capabilities, because many people had an image that Japanese companies is just importing. But what happens if Japanese companies making cars in the United States and start exporting to the world? That's a different message. The second is to reinforce R&D. It's not just assembly cars in the United States. We are doing the R&D in the United States. The third point is to increase the local content to up to 75, which the big three only has 50%. To boost Honda's US production engineering, that's the fourth point we did. And the fifth point is we're going to build more cars in the United States. So these were the 5-point strategies. But what's unique about this is, usually it's first you develop the strategy. Then you communicate that, right? But this time, there was no strategy. We started from developing the message. What kind of message will be important to have public engaged with us, for public to support Honda's operation? So we started to develop the message first, and then what we did is we went out to all the operations, research, development, engineering, manufacturing, sales, and try to find out if there's any proof points or any plan, and kind of gather all those plans, and then we kind of formed it and packaged it in this 5 points. So this was very unique, because this is, as you can see, in some cases, you have to reform the strategy itself to send a strong message to the public. It's not like you have a strategy, so you're going to communicate to the public. You even kind of reform your strategy itself to send a strong message to the public. So this is one kind of thing that which we did in 80s. And also, lastly, as I said, we broadened the audience. This is the list of the audience that we kind of approached. It comes from the media, it comes from the government, it comes from even the competitors, associations, Congress. All these, I would say, not just the stakeholders, but the shapeholders are listed here. And also the influencers, activists. Every association that target is being kind of listed, and we did a kind of a strategic approach to them. Now, the results. We got one of the kind of a symbol is how many coverage was being covered from the mass media. Because in these days, it's the 1980s, we don't have internet. There's no SNS. So the only kind of an indication whether you got a public support or not, basically is the media coverage. And all these are kind of the media coverage that we had. By the way, this Honda export to Japan, this photo was on the front page of Washington Post. Okay? And this one is very interesting. This is a car, this is Accord, US-made Accord, moving up to the ship and ready to go to Japan. Now, most of the public people already was quite used to seeing a kind of a scene which Japanese-made car coming down to United States. But this was upside down. So what we did is we approached the 3 networks. And it's more like if a dog bites man, no story. But if a man bites the dog, that's going to be a story. This is that. It's like, what? No one have been witnessed this kind of scene. So all these things has kind of promoted and had sent a message to the public. And now, lastly, I'm going to get to this photo. Why this is so symbolic to my basic experience is, this was in 1989. This is at the Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. And Mr. Honda is kind of watching some of the exhibit. I think the first US-made Honda Accord was exhibited. And I think he's now pointing that car. Now, why he was in Detroit in 1989? He became the first Japanese automotive leader to be awarded as a Hall of Fame of US automotive industry. It was the first time in Detroit, which was a symbol of anti-Japanese. He was there in 1989. And what really struck me was there was like more than 1,000 audience in a big stage. He made a very short speech, 15-minute speech. And what he said is, he only knows two English. Thank you, hello, okay? So what he did is, when he started, he said, thank you, United States. And then he turned into Japanese and talked about his thought. And then lastly, he again said, thank you, United States. Now, the content of his speech was, he just shocked me. What he said was, the content was, thank you very much, United States. US really made Honda become an automobile manufacturer. Honda was kicked out from Japan. It was true, because METI didn't want Honda to join the automotive industry in Japan. So he really said, United States welcomed Honda and basically accepted Honda and supported Honda, and we were able to become one of the major players in the automotive industry. Thank you, United States. So that was basically his speech. What was surprising to me was, in Detroit, more than 1,000 audience, it was a standing ovation. They were clapping there. It was just so amazing. It was this really kind of changed my life, definitely, and made me move to the communication consulting world. But, so that's the reason I tell you that this photo really represents or symbolizes my basic root of public engagement. So, to really kind of go through, one of the things that I can learn, or you can learn from the experience of Honda in the 80s, is that businesses are being judged by three courts, okay, what I call. One is a marketplace. You have to be judged by the marketplace, of course. You have to be successful. You have to provide good quality products. You have to make sure the customer is satisfied. You have to make sure that you build much better product than your competitors. You have to be evaluated from the market, the shareholders. So marketplace is the one court. The second place is court of justice. If you have a problem with a compliance issue, you get caught with this. You have to make sure your legal compliance is meted. But the third one is a court of public, which this court has a multi-criteria. It's not simple. And some of the criteria are very emotional, very sentiment. It's very unpredictable. There's so many things happen. And what's going to happen from now on is, especially the social networks now quite strong, and I think top-down is now eroding, as Mark said. You have to really start from the bottom. They have more power. This court of public is going to be one of the most challenging court for businesses. And it is very important that the business are ready to prepare to win the court of public engagement, to really to be successful. And the good example, just briefly, is in 2009, Toyota recall, okay? This really kind of made a fire of the court. The public really got angry. One reason is Toyota was negotiating with the Department of Transportation, trying to persuade them that this is not a recall, okay? But by doing that, they were not able to communicate enough, significantly, with the public in the first 6 months. So basically what happened was the whole public became anti-Toyota, because like a Toyota, which has one of the top brand, it also has a reputation risk if something happens. Because when something happens, there's a high expectation, because it's a big brand. So everybody will expect something more from Toyota. But Toyota failed to meet that. So all of a sudden, the expectation turned into an enemy and worked against Toyota at the same time. This is one thing that Toyota failed to meet with this public. The second one is a recent one of SoftBank. As you know, they were able to get Sprint, but they failed to get T-Mobile. As you know, any telecommunication business is linked with national security. So it becomes a very political issue. And the political issue is usually shaped by the public. And especially, unlike Toyota, SoftBank doesn't have any brand. So nobody knows about SoftBank so much. But in the United States, of course in Japan it's a very big name. But if a company which people doesn't recognize start to move aggressively, buying Sprint, now trying to buy T-Mobile, you have to be very careful. Because if there's a question mark, who is this company? Who are they? SoftBank, what is it? And now they're buying Sprint, they're buying US company, and now they're buying T-Mobile? And also, you have to be careful, they're competitors. It's AT&T and others, Verizon's. They are very equipped with how to fight in the court of public. So they will take advantage of that, definitely. So I think this case really is another case that, unlike Toyota, Toyota has a big brand, but even a company which doesn't have a brand also has a risk involved when you deal with public. But this is the big things. But recently in Japan, there are small things which you fail. When you fail to meet with the public expectation, you get fired. This is Benesse crisis. I think most of people you know. This happened in July 9th this year. And here is a statement, which Harada-san, who used to be the head of McDonald's Japan, has said. We understand that the leaked information was not the cause of hackers. Also, the suspect is not our group employees. Now, I'd like to ask questions. What made public anger about this?
He's saying that he's not responsible. It's company.
Exactly. It's not our employees. I'm not responsible. We're not. Okay? Because the suspect was like a kind of a vendor. So this sends a message to the public that I'm not responsible. So he got him fired. He totally, this was the first press conference, but this was so badly managed and the media kind of really attacked him. So he had to make another press conference a week later. And at that time, he was asked by the media saying, are you a victim or are you a victimizer? What is your answer, Mr. Harada? And what he said was, he kindly changed this mindset already after a week of harassment from the media. He said, I'm the victimizer. So he admitted it's his responsibility, okay? The interesting thing happened about a few weeks later. This is a new head of McDonald's Japan. They got into a trouble again. I'm sure you know this Chinese company's meat scandal. And basically, it was a supplier to McDonald's in Japan. So this was another press conference. And what happened is, as you know, she is a successor of Mr. Harada, okay? So either way, Mr. Harada stayed in McDonald's or moved to Benesse, he was not able to avoid the crisis. He had to attend this conference or the previous one, either way, okay? But anyway, this is very funny because the reporter saying the same question to her, are you a victim or a victimizer? She made a mistake. She said, McDonald is a victim, saying we're not responsible. So basically, she got him fired. So this kind of misstatement really irritates the public. You have to be very careful because from a legal standpoint, they're not responsible. But from a social point of view, you are responsible. This is totally different. The court of justice will judge through legal compliance, but the court of public will judge you through social compliance. And this is very difficult because the social compliance side has more multi-criteria. So the last page is, as I said, to repeat my message, is the public is going to become, how you engage with the public is becoming very, very important for companies, for businesses. And especially now, the Japanese company is going global. They have to face a lot of different public. It's not going to be like Japan. Thank you.
Shina, I very much enjoyed your presentation. We'll maybe have a little dialogue here before we turn it open to everybody else's questions.
Sure. Yeah.
I couldn't help but notice on that you had in my mind, the order wrong. I would say that you start with the public as number one as opposed to number three, because when Honda comes to America, what's the first thing you do? You go to a shape holder to get a certificate to be able to operate in America.
Exactly, yes.
And as I think what you, I think, very effectively said, it was them putting the public first that drove the strategy and was very effective for Honda.
Yes, I agree. And I think what happened is it's Mr. Honda's philosophy that he said public should, you just pointed out exactly. I think Mr. Honda will enjoy talking with you, definitely, but unfortunately, he's up there. Basically, Mr. Honda's philosophy was really the public to be the first. Because I think many Japanese companies like Panasonic, Konosuke Matsushita, and like even like Ibuka Dai or Morita-san, I think they had a mind that public is extremely important, as Mark, you said, the first priority for companies, because their philosophy is, without public, corporation does not exist. And in Japanese, when you say corporation, it's called kaisha, okay? You know Japanese characters, okay? Kaisha, it means corporation. But if you put it outside, it means society, shakai. So I think there's a kind of understanding in some of the Japanese leaders in those days that public is extremely important for corporations to survive. So you have to really focus on the public interest to benefit the public, and then the money follows, or the business follows, something like that. I think that was basically the starting point that we, Honda, in those days, were guided by his philosophy. And as I said, one of the philosophy was to build the car where you sell. Means you have to build the car where you are selling the most. So I think you, Mark, you hit it the right point in public should be the first.
And I've always said that this is a better, more richer path to differentiate your business in the marketplace than just about anything you can do in a functional skill of finance or even marketing, because you started with the public first, you started with the differentiating. How am I going to impact how the public thinks about me more broadly in terms of how I'm engaging with society? And that proved to be very powerful for Honda in the U.S. I would just go back to one of the points I made about this top-down versus bottoms-up. Each country is different around the world. The U.S. is definitively a bottoms-up culture. And going back to your 2009 case with Toyota on the brakes, again, they were taking a top-down approach of that top of the hierarchy, the administration, the transportation department, as opposed to thinking about the bottom of the hierarchy. And so you really need to evaluate the country that you're in. What segment of society, what interests in society are going to be the ones that are really going to be driving this decision?
Yes, right. From Mark, from your experience, like what would be the kind of recommendation to Toyota in those days? What will be, I think Toyota kind of came back to its norm. Now it's still, now strongest automobile back, and they are respected now. So they did overcome this big, huge crisis they had in 2009. What do you think that, looking at Toyota from your point of view, that what kind of lesson they have learned, and what can the other Japanese company learn from Toyota's experience?
Well, I think what every company can learn from the experience is something you touched on a couple times. If you're in a crisis situation, the first thing you do is acknowledge responsibility completely and work on fixing the problem, feeling bad about having made the mistake and fixing the problem from the beginning. Because you said that the reason everybody bought Japanese cars was because they were small and they had better gas mileage. Actually, we were Toyota owners before that time. I'm a high school graduate. I think we bought our first Toyota in '73.
Oh, God.
And it was because it was a high quality. The fit and finish, the bolts not coming up, off, and the molding of the door staying there for more than 2 or 3 years was the reason we bought it. So I think a big part of the Toyota lovers, which I would have to include my mother as a part of them, she'd always make sure that all the grandkids ended up buying a Toyota as opposed to something else, was because of the quality. And so this not only affected their reputation in the non-market by not accepting responsibility, but it also damaged them in the
Exactly.
market because they're not standing behind their quality. And so I think it was a double damage for Toyota.
I think in Toyota's case, it was quite clear that the first 6 months was a disaster. They were not totally managing the situation. But exactly after Mr. Toyota, Akio Toyota, appeared at the public hearing in Washington, D.C., it looks like that was some kind of a change happened. Because I think that was a time when officially the CEO of Toyota admitted the responsibility and kind of apologized. Have you seen these hearings? I was kind of seeing him, and it was a kind of surprise. He apologized, definitely. And that was a very strong message, not only to the customers or the shareholders, but also internally to the employees, and also to the suppliers, and also to the dealers. So I think that strong message which was sent out at the hearing was really kind of a turning point. And I think Japanese company really should really, as Mark, you said, that whenever there's a crisis, you really have to admit the responsibility. Because in some cases, as in your case, the supply chain could do something totally unexpected and damage your brand. But even that, you just can't say that's a supply chain, that's a vendor. It's not my responsibility. You also have to, if you have a brand, you have to take that as a responsibility, I think.
I would also say every culture is different and you need to understand the culture. Apologizing is a lot easier for an American. I think in an Asian culture, it's a much higher hurdle to get over. But who's your audience? They don't know it's a high hurdle for you to get over, and they only know how big is an apology in America, and it's expected to come very naturally. And so I think that is important. The other thing that I find, though, is you look at Japan, and you mentioned a couple times that it's looking to go out to even more markets. Every country is different. I presume you found the United States to be radically different than America. But as you're going to Brazil, or you're going to Russia, or you're going to India, they're different. What lessons would you have, having learned a new culture, that you would advise our students if they get stuck and sent by Honda to Mozambique? How do you go around and get to know Mozambique?
Oh, that's very good. Mozambique, I see. Well, I guess,
or any culture. How do you walk into a culture and get to know it?
I think what's going to be very interesting is the global competitions battlefield is now moving to more socialist country. Okay, it used to be like United States or Europe for Japanese global companies. So if you can win the war in United States, basically you can expand globally. So that was a kind of a pattern for most Japanese companies to go global. You go successful in the United Western market, and then you go global. But nowadays, it's kind of different. Many Japanese companies are starting with China or other socialist countries. And it's a totally different dynamism, because I don't know how much public exists in some of those countries, which means, actually, this is my question to you, Mark. One of the things is, I think the first thing that I will recommend you is think about public. I think public has a totally different format. The US is almost like the most advanced, I would say, from my experience, public. Japan has a unique public compared with the United States. But still, I feel there's a public. But if you go to China, this is very different. What is public? And I think defining public in each different market is the first thing that you should really think about. Now, my question I'd like to really ask you, Mark, is, okay, in China, is there a public? If there is, how do you get engaged with the public?
I think there's a public everywhere you go, and you know, as I answer the China question, I hearken back to, I was at an Economic Club of Washington event where we had the CEO of Toyota speaking, and a question he got was, how often do you talk with the Prime Minister? And he said, about once a month.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, there isn't any CEO in America that speaks to the president once a month. So you don't have the options of going at the high end of the pyramid. In China, there's a saying that says, the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. So the emperor, being the party, the State Central Committee, clearly has a huge sway over what happens in China. But also in each province or each city, those people have a great degree of independence. And the most important public you have in that type of situation includes them. And the most important thing you need to know about advocacy is, who do they want to be? What do they want to be? What do they want to be thought of positively as? And how can you be a part of that? A lot of those are trying to develop their own society, create different services, educate their own employees, bring jobs there. Is there any way that you can contribute to that? So part of that public is not just the emperor sitting in Beijing, but the individual people on the ground. And that may be several layers down in the government. It's probably more likely to be government in China, because China is very much a government-driven culture. But even having the employees on your side is not a bad thing.
Bad things. But it will be more on the top end
It'll not
compared
necessar-
with like United States or Japan.
It'll definitely, it's an Asian culture, so therefore they tend to be more top end.
I see.
But let me give you an example. I wrote a case on Quality Brands Protection Council, trying to protect intellectual property in China. And if you take a combative approach, that wouldn't work. But they found that they have such a thing called an economic police that would go after abuses of people making fake goods or making, using your brand. And they found that if they could find that economic police officer, which is several layers down in the chain of government, and figure out how could they help them get promoted to the next rung? How could they make them look good? How could they partner with them to basically help them do the job they were doing in a way that their bosses would look down on and say favorable things to them? And so that was the public that was most important in their mind about getting their intellectual property. Much higher up the food chain than would have happened in America, you would have probably gone straight to the public. But given that the media is controlled in China, you can't go straight to the public. But that government official you might be talking might be 8, 10, 20 layers down the rungs, but you're still probably dealing with a government official.
One of the things that, Mark, your expertise is in lobbying, I would say. You can talk about the lobbying, how it functions. But what I really noticed when I was working in the United States is the US have a very clear, transparent lobbying system that you can directly talk to the government or the Congress, to peoples who makes decisions, and you can kind of directly talk with them in a transparent way. So I had no problem going to the Congress or to each department and just kind of express the opinion of Honda and attach the research survey, our activity, how much economic impact it has to the United States. And you can argue that, and you can have a dialogue with them directly. And all the discussion is transparent, so everybody can see. Now, in Japan, we don't have that system. And from my point of view, what I'm kind of feeling is, I work for many Japanese companies as a consultant. And what they are saying is, Japanese government is not user-friendly for them compared with the United States. Because, as I said, many Japanese companies now fighting in the market, which is a socialist country, which the government has a power, and you have to deal with the government. But when you say a private company dealing with the government, there's no way you can win the war. So you always have to go back to your government and ask support from your government. And one of the discussions I'm having these days with some of the executive in Japanese company who wants to globalize is that U.S. government is much more user-friendly for companies because they have a system called lobbying, but also not just lobbying. If their argument is consistent with what U.S. government wants to achieve, they will provide you with the help. Even they will kind of help you communication with the China government. But in Japan, that doesn't happen because there's no lobbying system which the company can utilize. But the only underground lobbying system which Japan has is called Zoku, tribe, politicians, which only limited companies can use. Not all the companies. So this is basically the lack of lobbying system, transparent lobbying system in Japan is really penalizing and kind of providing disadvantage for most of the Japanese company to really fight successfully against a socialist government. And we are arguing that. But what do you think about that? What do you think about this?
Well, first of all, I think you need to think of what people normally think about as lobbying, as I'm trying to emphasize, needs to be part of a much broader fabric to be effective. But I absolutely agree that having formalized lobbying laws is a very good thing. Everybody tries to pretend you're holier than thou and you don't have lobbying going on. There's lobbying going on in every country on the planet, in every state, every city, every place. You look at Brazil that prides himself in not having a lobbying law. I think they've had 5 or 6 or 7 ministers put in jail.
Yes.
Because it's not going on through the formalized channels. If you define the rules, make sure everybody follows the rules, prosecute people that aren't following the rules, and make sure it's transparent so you know who met with who.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
If they're making a contribution, what was it? And if they asked for something specific, what was it? It is very important. I do agree that, as I mentioned in the third example, that probably the big companies in Japan have a closer connection to the government than the big companies in America. But my guess is the small companies in America have a more direct connection. The other thing I would say is that you're absolutely right. Your embassy, your government, is oftentimes a vital source for you in different countries. Let me give you one example. I'm in with a class, because we take our classes, we teach you the core skills either face-to-face or online, but then we take you to different parts of the world to find out how is it different here, and it is radically different everywhere in the world. We were visiting in Istanbul and with PepsiCo, and what happened there is that the government decided to ban the sale of chips in schools. Now you can decide whether that's a legitimate thing to do or not, but the challenge was they didn't ban the sale of salty snacks because a Turkish company makes salty snacks. Frito-Lay, owned by PepsiCo, makes the chips. They just banned the chips and not the salty snacks. A normal thing that a company would do would be go to their association and try to get the association to make the case so it isn't just the company. They go to the association. That Turkish company is also a member of the association. They say, we don't see any problem with this. So therefore, the association can't help you, and it's basically down to you and your government. This is clearly an anti-American, local thing. Yeah. And your embassy is about the only people that can engage.
Exactly, yeah.
And so you have to have that kind of relationship. The other thing that really is important for Americans to understand about Japan is your ministries within the context of your overall government have the biggest sway of any country I've been to. Your ministries also have amongst the fewest political appointees. You somehow view, political appointees as being not part of your system. But those political appointees are a key conduit. And then the final thing I'll say is you weren't necessarily presenting Honda's point of view, you were presenting, as you said more fully in your comments, how Honda can help America.
Exactly, yes.
Whenever you are engaging somebody in quote-unquote lobbying, if you only come in and say, here's what I want and here's what's good for me, you're not going to get a second meeting. They're going to turn their ears off. They're not going to listen. But if you come in and say, here is how what I'm looking for is not only going to be good for me, but it's going to be good for you, and here's the many ways where it would benefit your constituents,
Exactly, yes.
then you're going to be far more effective.
Exactly. Yes, I think.
So perhaps we have some questions out there in the audience. Who's got the first question? No shy folks out there? We might have questions for you. This is actually a quiz at the end. We didn't tell you this, but who's got the first question?
Please.
We got a question right up front here.
Who was raising their hands?
Great.
I have a question. Like United States and Japan, they're developed countries. They have a system, they have a legal system, corporate systems, and as Mr. Tanaka mentions that, very transparent system. But when you go to emerging economies, or you can say the underdeveloped countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and that region, so you see that the corporate world doesn't care about the public, because over there, the low quality, low price is a more demanding than the high quality and low price. So how do you think that the public should be engaged or could be engaged in those countries where you have a good brands, but when you see the public are not with you, you don't, I mean, I have seen this couple of companies there, I've worked with them, and when they have a problem with the products, instead of apologizing those things and anything, they say, okay, you don't want to buy, don't buy. And even you look in the Tata Motors back in 10, 15 years back, they make the motors, they have a lot of problems because their international import was banned at that time. So the question is that involvement of public is very important for the corporations, as you mentioned, and we understand. But how can you engage the public and grow your business in those countries where the corporate world doesn't care about public?
Well, I think that creates a huge opportunity for you in a country if the other corporations aren't caring about it, because they do care about quality, and it's a big challenge. So I find, it's intriguing. In some parts of the country, they only trust somebody from a different country. One group does a survey of how do people trust in different countries manufacturers from different countries. And I think that a Japanese brand, as you were defining a Honda brand, you can define a Japanese brand or American brand in those countries. I know the McDonald's brand, having been to India, even though they can't sell hamburgers, is still very pervasive because they sell protein. Quick protein is what they sell, a different type of quick protein in India. But I think they've developed a reputation for having a quality product and a safe quality eating product that won't get you in any kind of indigestion. And that's made them very well. But, Tata came out with this very cheap car. But now they're facing real issues, that there's issues in terms of the safety. And can you do this $3,000 car in a way that's safe for people, doesn't get them killed? So I think you're right that over time, public will bring it force up. Those companies that are responding to the public are going to differentiate those themselves from those that aren't.
I think getting into the new market, especially in the developing market, usually you have to start from the product quality, but low price. It's a value, a dollar value. And I think that's the first initial stage. And once you are successful, your operation will start growing, which means your presence is going to grow in that country. And more, you have more presence growing. You do have to get in contact with various stakeholders, but also shareholders. And gradually, you will start feeling some constraints in some cases, because how you kind of communicate with them. And at the same time, so kind of growing your presence means you have to face with more different stakeholders, shareholders. Okay, that's one thing that you really have to put in mind. But at the same time, public itself is evolving. More and more, like internet is going on. Now people, there's no border in informations. So they'll get a lot of information from outside, which means the public itself start evolving. They get more information. They get more issues. They see that you have to have a quality more than the cost, or, their mind started to change. So basically, there's the two things, that more and more your presence gets in, your kind of audiences get complicated. At the same time, the public itself is going to get more evolved and change. So to deal with that situation, you always have to think how to engage. What is your public? How you define the public? How you engage your public? I think that is eventually, you have to face it anyway. So I think through Honda's experience in the United States, we started from a small car. And we started to expand our operation. And at that time, we just had to deal with the dealers and the customers. And that's it. We didn't have to worry about employees because we were not manufacturing at that time. But once you grow and grow, you now kind of diversified stakeholders. You have to take care of them. Now you get the shareholders. So, and also the public, especially the United States public, is very advanced. Or more demanding, I would say. And so eventually, not just in the United States, but in any countries, I think the same situation happens. So you have to be prepared to really deal with that change in the situation. It's accelerating because of this internet.
I think there's some prime opportunities in countries like India. If you think about what Shin talked about with Honda, they figured out, what does the American public want? They want the manufacturing brought up to speed so that the quality of an American car was similar to that of a Japanese car. So by importing that technology, that lean manufacturing into America, I can tell you as an American, I saw that as a benefit Honda was bringing to America. Also, this exporting, even if it's just one car going up that ramp, it's appealing to Americans. If you think of the challenges that the retailers have had getting into India because of the restrictions, how much food is wasted in the supply chain in India? It's an unbelievable amount. 70 to 80% of the food is wasted because generally they don't have a formalized retail system. And when the organized retailers went in there, they had to basically set up a supply chain for food from ground zero. And in so doing, the waste was going from 70 to 80% down to 15, 20%. But to Shin's point, if you do that but you don't tell anybody, what credit are you getting for it? You should want to engender in the minds of everybody in India, I want Metro, I want Walmart, I want Carrefour coming in here and creating this system, because I'd actually like to eat a little bit more protein than I'm eating right now. And I'd just as soon have people to be able to get out of just laboring in the fields and doing something more productive. And you have to create that image that you are helping them to achieve for themselves that they want to have. Doing so, just like it made Honda in America, you can do in many countries around the world if you take a similar approach.
Thank you.
Next question. We have one right over here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Tanaka. I have two questions for you. The first one is, like you said, like Mr. Tanaka said, that the public opinion are so diverse. And so how can you do to like satisfy all their needs? Because like we have to satisfy the public, right? And it leads to another question, which is related to the Honda car that is export back to Japan. Like at this time, the exportation is like very beneficial for the U.S. public. But how about Japanese public? Did they welcome these cars?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Good question. Well, I think I will ask maybe Mark about how to deal with this diversifying and needs for public opinions. Yes, I think it's becoming more complicated. And so it's very important to really make sure that what is the public trend, to really monitor where the public is moving. And when you say public, it's not just public. You can be, like as Mark said, activist could be. It could be government officials. It could be all sorts of the segment of public exist. So in a way, what we always kind of consult our client is really to monitor the key players, which really kind of form the public opinion, and make sure that this monitor them, really kind of make sure that whenever the company is going to send out the message, that it will really meet, at least. It won't, so it's really to really know what the public is thinking, more specifically as possible, and then kind of craft the message and send it out. Which I'd like to ask Mark to kind of further develop this thought. But the second question is, I think your question is whether the Japanese public welcomed the US-made car, which a US-made car was a kind of a perception issue had. Well, I think when Honda did that, we were very concerned about it. So what we did is in Marysville, Ohio, a plant, is that we developed a separate line only for Japanese, send cars. And we made sure that everything is going to be right, okay? And then we sent the car. As a matter of fact, what happened was, we thought it was perfect. We received 400 complaints from the dealers with the US-made cars. But when my colleagues in US kind of heard those complaints, many people were surprised. Isn't this over quality, the issue? Because one of the complaint was, the smell of the car is not right. I mean, which really, if you look into it, in Japan, compared with the United States, in the United States, a car is a kind of basic transportation. But in Japan, it's not. It's, as a public transportation is so developed, most people use car for luxury, leisures, in the weekends. And whenever they buy a car, they expect a specific smell. When they open the car, they have this new car smell. So many customers wanted that smell. But the car from the United States didn't smell that way. So what happened is, the US engineers started to kind of get quite embarrassed with this, but the order from Japan was fix it. So what happened was we had to find out what was the source of the smell, which makes a new car smell. And what are the materials? Is it coming from the dashboard? Is it coming from the handles? Is it coming? So we kind of detected that, and actually the result was a combination. Now, what are the materials, basic materials, which makes that noise? So we got into it, we did the research, and we detected. The second is, can we procure this material in the United States? So it took 6 months to deal and fix it. And finally, US operation were able to create this Japanese new car smell. So you can see, it was a big challenge for Honda to really sell cars in Japan, because Japan is, some people say it's over quality, okay? They are too demanding. But at the same time, if you can sell a car in Japan, you can sell everywhere. So I think Honda really kind of faced that challenge, but I think now we have overcome, and which also helped the US side. As this is another kind of contribution, because now the US operation can really develop a car, same or better car than in the United States, because of that experience. Than Japan, much better car than in Japan, in the United States, because of that experience thing. So I would say it was a challenge. We had some problems, but eventually it worked out good for the United States. But I'd like to get back, which I will be interested in.
In terms of the public, we view public to be you. And we're giving you a different message than we're giving you. I don't know if you figured that out, but digital communications allows you to have individualized conversations. And I would suggest that technology in the space of campaigns has been decisive in many of the last several elections. Going back to 2004, in Bush's reelect, I remember Karl Rove being asked a question by a political activist saying, "You clearly made a mistake sending out direct mail pieces because I got a pro-life piece and nobody in my neighborhood is pro-life." And Carl said to her, "Are you pro-life?" And she says, "Yes." "Then you got a pro-life piece. Nobody else in your neighborhood got a pro-life piece." That was new and different in that campaign. Part of Obama's real strength was the ability to go even deeper. And in this last campaign, not only did they know what issue you cared about and how you should frame the issue in order to motivate you to go to the polls, but they would also be able to figure out who are your 10 you're a big supporter, who are your 10 friends that haven't voted yet? And can you connect to those 10 friends via Facebook and encourage them to go to the polls? So the degree to which it is becoming an individualized conversation is rapidly happening. And that happens in business too. Yeah. As a retailer, if I sign on to Macy's website and my wife signs on to Macy's website, we are going to see a completely different first page. If we're not, you're not a really good retailer. But it should reflect knowing something about you and what you're more likely to buy from the company. And so that individualization is a key part of what we focus on. We have a major research effort of applying big data for political success.
Yes.
We have 5 to 6 digital classes. One of our classes is taught by one of Sheen's colleagues in America that also happens to be a graduate of ours. And how do you tell a story through digital? How do you tell different stories through digital, unique stories that are going to connect with different segments? And as we say, analytics can divide all the left-handed guitar players into one group. But do you have something different to say to the left-handed guitar players than to the right-handed guitar players? If you don't, it doesn't make a sense. But trying to figure out how you do all that messaging is a big part of what we focus on at our schools. And there's components of the organization that Sheen's involved in that do that as well.
Yes, exactly. I think what's very interesting is I think the political campaign, like the presidential campaign, is very interesting from a communication professional because to me it's like a Formula One racing. Formula One racing is not a marketing event. It's more like a technology development event. Because Formula One has a lot of conditions that you have to cope with, but you have to develop the new technology through an extreme condition. So political campaign is exactly that from a communication point of view. Each time there's a presidential campaign happens, there's always an innovation being made. Like in the last Obama, no, the first Obama thing, the internet was really the tool that they developed, and which those kind of technology or method has been kind of now went to the business side and be utilized in the marketings and so on. And right now, as Mark mentioned, the big data, the digitals, internet, all these things can really segment the audience, target audience, in a very specific way. You can identify each specific, for example, like what kind of value, or who is a supporter of maybe Obama, who is watching this channel, TV channel, at 3 a.m. in the morning. You can kind of identify that. So you can see that in the old days, I have experience in doing political campaign. In 2003 to 2005 with DPJ, Democratic Party of Japan. And at that time, we were able to segment into maybe 7 categories and kind of develop a message to each audience, 7. But nowadays, it's a few hundred you can segment it because of the technology we have. So I think this method is definitely going to change how the business is going to communicate with the public, how to engage the public. So the technology is here. It's a matter of how you're going to apply those technology in the right way to make sure your business strategy is being implemented and that the public engagement is going to help the implementation of or realization of your business strategy.
I would just also say that we have one of our graduates, Kiko Kawai, with us here today, who has helped me engage a lot with your politicians. You have very big restrictions on what you can do in campaigns here in the Japan elections that we don't. You just opened up a little bit on the digital side here in the last upper house elections. And it didn't have much of an impact, but what we are finding, part of it's because we are allowed to get a voter file. So whether you voted or not and things like that, that information is not available in Japan or other countries. But part of what we're finding, it has to be a two-way conversation. People are expecting to be interacting with their leaders much more. Your voter participation amongst the youth is relatively low in Japan. How do you get that up? The youth aren't going to be getting engaged in politics unless they can feel it's an interaction. Part of the technology that we're going to be at that sharp edge of the spear in politics right now is when you send a Twitter message to Obama, they want to get a reaction back on that Twitter message or that Facebook message. How many thousands or millions of Twitter messages are you getting? In a business, you can go through and do sort of a scrub the words, and if I get this combination of words, I give this response, and I'm going to be right 80% of the time. But if you're wrong 20% of the time with a message coming back to a response, that could be an attack against you.
Yes, exactly.
So your level of standard as to how you make that conversation interactive in social media on a mass scale is one of the things we are working on in the campaigns right now. And that's at a higher fit and finish and standard than anybody in commercial. And my guess is we'll also drive commercial applications in the future. Those are the types of things we focus on our school at the Graduate School of Political Management. Other questions? I know we had more.
It's already on. Good evening. So if my understanding is correct, engaging public will be very beneficial if only corporate is coming into a country where you have a bottom to top structure, where the public is, let's say, have quite a significant influence, right, in everyday's life. But if the structure is more of a top to bottom, then, well, you're still addressing the public, but you will get to focus in a more narrow type of public, probably even only the government. So my question would be, what if you go to a certain country as a corporate or as an entity, and then the structure is changing? Because that actually happened nowadays, even in the last 10 years. My country probably being one of it, where the original, I'm from Indonesia. We have a luxury of experiencing this bottom to top structure for the past few years, but there is quite a significant changes that quite a significant probability that it will change into a top to bottom again. So as a corporate, how do you recognize that this particular country is in that transition period? And as a corporate, what should you do to address the possibility of changes? Thank you.
Well, you know, I say the biggest difference between making a widget in Boston or Beijing or Bhutan is politics, which is why you should be spending 11 times as much time studying these political issues as you are the market issues. When you're dealing in transition economies, an interesting book to study is Ian Bremmer's J-curve, which says in a more open society like America, if you have instability, the best way to make it more stable is to have it be more open. You know, release it, make it more transparent, get more people involved. If you're in a really authoritarian government, the best way to get it more stable is to be more authoritarian. But why he calls it J-curve, to get from authoritarian over to participative, you go through a very unstable period that can be very ugly. And we're seeing that in many countries that just first cracked open. They started going down into this very unstable period. People got scared by that, and they went back up the authoritarian path. That's not unusual. To get all the way over to the participative side, in many countries, for better or for worse, is decades, not years. So as a business, if you want to engage in those, and so those are some of your richest opportunities, you need to be engaged at multiple levels of society and try to do it in a way that you're not getting into the friction points between the levels of society. Because even though it may revert back to the top being in charge and the people on the lower ends of the society being less listened to, they'll remember it if you abandon them. So that's where I say be humble in terms of the commitments you make into any level of society, but make sure that you follow through with all of those. And those actually require you to have more nimbleness and more flexibility and broader connections throughout society than you would in many other segments. So it's a challenge, but there's such difficulty doing that. If you can actually navigate those environments, there's some of the richest opportunities available to you in terms of both benefiting your business as well as benefiting society.
Well, as from my experience, the change, the transition, I think the corporation cannot move that or guide that, okay? It's a given thing. But what's important is whether the company is ready to really understand the situation and identify the right audience, identify what is going to be the real issue, which will affect their strategy in that market. I think those kind of things they can really monitor and be ready to take action to deal with the situation whenever there is a situation. One of the things that I feel, compared with Western companies versus Japanese companies, one of the weaknesses I see in the Japanese company is Western companies who are global are more ready. They have a troop, a kind of like a Delta Force type of troop, who are only focused on that and go to the market, make sure all the issues, risks are being kind of identified, and kind of identify the key audiences, and then the real marketing groups move into to start the business, okay? I call it a Delta Force approach. There are, not all of them, but there are companies which already have that kind of group, which really is a strategic unit guiding the business to a new territory. Japanese company doesn't have that mostly. What they do is they just send the whole troop at once without intelligence or whatever. They just get in. And so right now I think there are more Japanese companies who are thinking how to deal with the situation. Instead of having their troops going to the market right away, which was the case for most Japanese companies, send out kind of a team who can really analyze the soil, the battlefield, the risks, the competitions, the kind of government legal circumstances, what are the risks, who are the public, and then kind of get that information, kind of bed it in and feed it back to their strategy for that country. And kind of gradually move into the countries. Is now in starting with some of the company, because right now, Japanese company, there will be like about 5,000 companies going abroad. It's a huge number of companies. And they will face these issues, definitely. But right now, their organization is not structured that way. They don't have a horizontal organization which really focus on those areas. Intelligence, identifying the risk, and also identifying the audiences, dealing with the public engagement, definitely. So I think to really deal with that situation, you do have to have a special kind of a function which really kind of help pave the way for the real business to come in. So that's what's happening in some of the Japanese companies.
But part of the way you get that really understanding is to have a very diverse workforce. Intriguingly, I was speaking in Singapore to an audience that included a Chinese student who gave the, you know, you're making it appear as if America has all the answers. And I said, actually, the strength of America is we know we don't have all the answers. And if you look at a lot of these companies from countries like you're talking about, like India or otherwise, and look at their biggest companies, the people sitting around the boardroom either all have the last name or know the people with those last names for the last 30 years. When you look at American companies, the real thing, Coca-Cola, is headed up by a Turk. The competition, PepsiCo, is headed up by a female Hindu born in India. And up until recently, Citibank, which was flying our flag, also was a Hindu Indian. So we recognize that I could spend my life trying to understand Japan, and I'm not going to come close to understanding Japan as somebody who grew up in Japan. And so getting as diversified a workforce as you can, making that an open society where they can share their different points of view and bounce it back and forth
Yes.
with each other is one of the greatest ways to get the intelligence that
Yes.
Sheen was just talking about.
I totally agree with that, yes. And as you know, the board members in Japan, mostly, there are a very small number of outside board members, which really kind of, as Mark has pointed out, that limits to really learn about new cultures or angles or perspectives. That will limit Japanese company, which I think still, I mean, even Toyota, if you look into the board members, there are so few outside board members, which really limits the flexibility of Toyota, I would say. And if you talk about Toyota, it's the same in other companies in Japan. So I think diversity is going to be a very key word.
We're wrapping to the end, so I'll maybe end it on that diversity by talking about, a lot of times I say milk and cookies are very different from one another, and yet they go very well together. This diversity is very powerful. Just one last story. I just told how the most different people are from you, the more powerful they are for you in your network in many different ways. I told this to a group of students. I told them to break into groups, came back from break. We had 4 students from Latin America. They were all in the same group. I said, you clearly didn't get what I was saying. And so I split up the groups so that each one of those 4 Latin Americans headed up the 4 groups so that they were spread out. I said, however many females and males, that proportion should be the same in the group. However many Republicans and Democrats or conservative and liberals, it should be the same in each group. Because getting those different views bouncing off each other is going to be one of the defining characteristics as to whether you can engage with society, whether you can find that right answer, whether you can be nimble and quick enough to succeed in today's increasingly political world. So I'll just emphasize again, public's number one. Figure out how to engage with those shapeholders, the political, regulatory, media, activist groups in a way that benefits you and society. You learn how to do that for your business, for your organization, for your NGO, and you will have a very successful career, and we look forward to following that successful career.
Well, I think, as Mark said, you have to really represent your view clearly, or other people won't understand what your view is. Which means, I think what everybody should do here is you have to speak out. You have to kind of express your opinion, views, because if you don't do that, the others won't understand you. And by presenting your views, also this will encourage other people to present their views. And kind of really diversity's magic is to really exchange views and get more perspectives. And that will really be one of the key criteria or quality, I would say, for people like you who are now in the business and wants to get, eventually everybody is going to get into a globalization process. So eventually you have to work with the very diversified colleagues. And in that case, you really have to share your view. You have to speak out you have to really express yourself. I think that's very important for any businessman in Japan or overseas.
Arigato.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.